creating the scene and maybe doing a mass hoax on everybody. It was interesting theory that he had a part in that. He had this lens. But we're still going on. Let's get to his last movie. He died on the final edit. The day he did it, it took him 2 years to make. It was Eyes Wide Shut, and it portrayed this secret society. And it was quite scary and enlightening at the same time, what's possibly going on behind the scenes. Jim, do you think this is what some of our world leaders are participating in, these kind of extravagant,
yes, I think that Eyes Wide Shut was an attempt by Stanley Kubrick to try to tell us what's going on, and you have to understand that he died just about the time that was being completed, in that the studio altered and edited a whole lot of that movie. That's why I know the first time I saw it, I thought, well, it's a pretty good flick, and I think they're really trying to tell something here, but it's kind of disjointed, and I think that they edited it heavily to so that it, number one, everybody could just say, well, it's just a movie, and number two, it's like, well, what was he trying to say here, But and I also I have seen the European documentary that's where they interview Richard Nixon's secretary and Stanley Kubrick's widow, and including Henry Kissinger and Alexander Haig, and they all were talking about how that Nixon had commissioned Stanley Kubrick because he already had the sets and the space suits and everything needed to film a moon landing in the event that we went to the moon on Apollo 14, and then Apollo 11, I'm sorry, and then came back, and the radiation in space, particularly the Van Allen radiation belt, may have fogged the photographs and film, and he was concerned that the rest of the world would say, well, hey, you guys claim you went to the moon, but where are the films? Where are the photographs? So he had Kubrick secretly record this moon landing, okay? And I think that seems to be pretty much beyond question. Now, the question is, what did we see? Did we see an actual moon landing, or did we see the Kubrick footage?
A lot of people state that during the moon landings that we were scared off by extraterrestrials, or there was possibly these humongous, buildings and bases on the far side of the moon. What do you know about those?
Well, just almost not much more than what you do. Yes, I've heard the same rumors, but of course, there's never been any official admission of that. But then all you have to do is just back off and look at the whole situation. We had 22 rockets ready to go, and we were told that once we got to the moon and we were going to continue to go, we were going to build a base on the moon, we were going to mine the minerals of the moon, and it would help pay for the U.S. space program. And yet we made 6 trips, I think, and then said, no, that's it, nothing there, folks, we're just not going to go back. And that was, 30, 40 years ago. What happened to all of that, and why did we have those rockets ready to go and then didn't use them? It's kind of similar to going to the time and trouble and expense of building a Rolls Royce and then say, well, we're not going to drive it around because we can't afford the gasoline. And they say, it just costs too much, and none of that makes sense. And I think it actually kind of lends support to the idea that in some way we were warned off and told, hey, no, don't come back.
It's Kennedy's idea to go to the moon, and I want to get back to the Zapruder film. What do you think why it took so long, 14 years before that famous film came out publicly?
Well, on the broadest possible sense, and just from a common sense and physics standpoint, we were told, and the official word still is, that it was Oswald with 3 shots from the Skullberg Depository, which was 200 feet behind him and 60 feet in the air. We'd be coming in from behind him, and yet it's obvious to anyone who's seen the Zapruder film that he's violently thrown to the left and to the rear, which indicates a shot from the right front. And I think that's the reason why it was covered up. In fact, here's proof that they knew this and that they tampered with it, is that Time Life, which got control of the Zapruder film, published still frames from the Zapruder film, and yet at the frames that covered the fatal headshot, they said there was a printing accident, and they transposed those frames so that you couldn't tell from the still frames that he was being thrown to the rear. Now, okay, maybe that was a printing accident, except, interestingly enough, the same accident occurred in the Warren Commission report. They also published still frames from the Zapruder film, and they also accidentally transposed the headshot so that you couldn't see that he was thrown to the left and to the rear. To me, that is highly indicative of a major cover-up. And by the way, it's been held for so long that the Zapruder film was a timeline, photographic timeline of the assassination, and it's been long cited as one of the most important pieces of evidence in determining what actually happened to Kennedy. But in my new updated version of Crossfire, which is due out in either late October or early November, you're going to find that there is an abundance of evidence now to show that the Zapruder film was in the hands of the CIA that very weekend and was doctored before it was given to Time Life. And in fact, I cite 11 Hollywood film experts who are expert in all kinds of film, including 8mm, who say that at the time of the headshot that there are frames of the Zapruder film that have been crudely painted on. So in other words, you can't even trust the Zapruder film these days.
Blake, I know you got some follow-up questions. Go ahead.
Thanks. It's quite interesting that it's been in the possession of the CIA, doctored film. How are you going to judge even the Zapruder film? I wanted to dispel the rumor on what you would think. Would you dispel the rumor? People say that the driver may have done this shot. There's this famous image where it appears that the driver. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. Yes. That did not happen. Okay? Again, I published the pertinent frame in my new updated Crossfire, and it's obvious when you get a clear version of that frame of the Zapruder film that Greer, the driver, William Greer, his hands are on the wheel. He does, contrary to his testimony, where he said he never looked back. He didn't even know the assassination happened until Roy Kellerman next to him said, "We're hit, get us out of here." And he stepped on the gas. But contrary to that, he did turn his head and look back over his right shoulder towards the president as the brakes were applied to the car, and it came to almost a dead stop until after the headshot was delivered, and then it accelerates on out of the plaza. So, yeah, that's kind of questionable, but no, his hands are on the steering wheel, and what seems to be a gun and a flash are just artifacts of sunlight. Back in those days, it was quite the custom for men to wear hair grease. You know, you grease it. Now they don't call it grease anymore. It's I forget what they call it. They call it something else now, but it's still greasing your hair down. And they did, and this was sunlight reflecting off of Kellerman's head, and also sunlight glinting off of the steel. It's like a rollover bar, except it's not really a rollover bar. It's a frame, a metal frame behind the two drivers that, when the top is up, they can raise a privacy window, and it goes up into that frame. I think the window was down, but the frame was still there, and you see sunlight glinting off of that, which to some people was a shot. But anyway, without going into long details, the idea that the driver shot Kennedy is simply wrong.
Who do you think did kill Kennedy, or was it a part of the conspiracy?
Well, when you say who killed Kennedy, that's a multi-level question. Are you talking about who actually pulled the trigger? Are you talking about who passed the money? Are you talking about who gave the orders? Are you talking about who benefited? So as far as who actually fired the shot, that's pretty much open to debate now, since they've covered that up for so many years and tried to blame it on Oswald. The only thing I'm fairly confident of is that Lee Harvey Oswald, I do not believe he even fired a shot that day. And if he did, he certainly didn't hit anybody. And the reason I say that is because here's two items of fact that tends to exonerate Oswald. One, as soon as he was taken to the police station, they gave him a paraffin test where they put paraffin on his hands and on his face to find out if there was any residual gunpowder or nitrates indicating he might have fired a weapon that day. It showed that he had faint traces of nitrates on his hands, but no gunpowder, and no gunpowder or nitrates on his face. Well, I can assure you, since I have one of those 6.5 Mannlicher loose bolt Italian war rifles, that the only way you're going to even come close to getting 6 shots out of it in, 3 shots in 6 seconds, is to continue to hold it up next to your cheek, the typical rifle firing position. And then you don't have time to lower it, so you have to crank the bolt right there by your face. And I can assure you, if he had fired a rifle and then opened that bolt, the gases would have blown nitrates and gunpowder back on his face. But he had no traces of gunpowder on his hands or face, and only traces of nitrates on his hands, which he could have gotten from ink, printing ink, which he would have gotten by handling those boxes of school textbooks there at the school book depository. The second piece of evidence is that if you look in Appendix 11 of the Warren Commission report, you'll find the report from Captain Will Fritz, who is the only in-depth interrogation of Oswald. And even then, reportedly, there was no tape recording made, no stenographer notes. All we have is what Fritz said in his report. But right there, he said he asked Oswald, where were you at the time of the shooting? And Oswald said he was in the downstairs lunchroom, not the second floor lunchroom where he was found less than a minute or so after the shooting holding a Coca-Cola in his hand or a soft drink, but the downstairs lunchroom, also known as the Domino Room. And he said, okay. He said, was there anybody in there with you? And he said, yeah, there were these 2 other employees. One of them's named Junior, and the other is kind of tall and skinny. Well, Harold Norman is tall and skinny, and Junior Jarman were indeed in that lunchroom eating their lunch before moving up to the 5th floor to watch the motorcade. And, of course, any good defense attorney would say, well, now, how could Oswald have correctly identified those guys being in there unless he had been there to see them for himself? And it's also true that they found Oswald's jacket and his clipboard in the downstairs Domino lunchroom. So I think there's pretty good evidence that he was exactly where he said he was.
I wanted to ask you about Jack Ruby, and how does he fit into all this, the conspiracy?
Well, Jack Ruby was a major player for organized crime in Dallas, and was also very well politically connected in Dallas. In fact, was the guy behind a lot of high-stakes poker games in Dallas that included a lot of the wealthy oil men. Henry Wade, the district attorney, was even said to have gone to some of those parties. He was pretty much connected to the Dallas high rollers, and I think he was given marching orders by the mafia. He told some close friends that it wasn't even his idea to come to Dallas. He wanted to go to California. He wanted to go to Hollywood, like Johnny Roselli. But he said, I was told that I had to go to Dallas. So, in other words, he was a mafia pawn and had been ever since he was running messages for Al Capone back in Chicago as a young boy. So he's well connected. So when the mafia gives you a directive, an order, you just carry it out. And the key to Ruby's shooting of Oswald, and by the way, I could put about 15 witnesses on the stand back then who would have testified that they knew that Oswald and Ruby were together prior to the assassination. So Ruby was a player in the whole thing. And that's another thing, too. Let me quickly add. I'm not saying Oswald was a total innocent off the street. He was involved in this plot, but according to his ex-girlfriend, he was a low-level U.S. agent who had started off working for the Office of Naval Intelligence and then been passed along to the CIA, and at the time of the assassination was being guided and manipulated by the CIA and the FBI, because information was developed that he was an FBI informant with the code T-179 and being paid a small sum to be an informant for the FBI. So he was there, and I think he thought he was reporting back on the progress of the assassination plot, thinking that it would be stopped, and never understanding that he was being set up to be the patsy. But when he got taken alive, then it was incumbent upon the conspirators to get rid of him. That's when they activated the mafia connection, and Ruby was told to go and silence him. Now, we were told at the time that, and we know this for a fact, that just a few minutes before the transfer of Oswald, Ruby was next door at the Western Union office sending a MoneyGram to one of his strippers. And so they've argued that, he couldn't have known when they were going to move Oswald, and therefore it was just an accident that he stumbled down into the basement just at the time that Oswald came out. And he was so angered at the thought of Mrs. Kennedy having to come back to Dallas and go through all of this, that he just stepped out and shot Oswald as a spontaneous act. And yet what we now know, and the House Committee verified, he had been stalking Oswald the whole weekend. And to understand the shooting, all you have to do is reverse the circumstances. It wasn't that he just suddenly showed up when they moved Oswald, which occurred an hour later than they said they were going to move him, but instead that they didn't move Oswald until Ruby was in position to shoot him. And Ruby dragged his feet because he didn't really want to do that. In fact, he told the reporters at the time of his trial, he said, "I can't really talk to you. I'm supposed to be crazy," you know.
There were the signals like...
Go ahead, Blake.
Yeah, he also said there's a big plot going on right now. So he tried to tell the Warren Commission, he said, "My life's not worth a plug nickel here in Dallas. Can you get me out of here and take me to Washington? If you do," he says, "I think I can lay things out for you." And he says, "And if you don't, I think we're going to see a whole new form of government," you know. And the Warren commissioners, including Earl Warren, said, "Well, we can't really do that, and besides it's lunchtime," so they left.
Do you think there's more video?
Incredible.
Do you think there's more film out there? Mr. Preston's online here. I want to get him on, but I just want to get this quick question. Do you think there's more film that the government still has that hasn't been released on the assassination of JFK?
Oh, yes. Yes, I think the Beverly Oliver's film, which was taken from the opposite side of Elm Street and probably showed the scuba depository in the background, might have been a really, really critical film. And yet she said that was taken by the FBI, and we've never seen that, and they deny they have anything like that. So I think actually somewhere buried in government files, if they hadn't been destroyed, that there are very, very interesting films and or photographs. And I also think that there may be some in the hands of private citizens. It seems like just every few years something crops up because there were hundreds of people there in Dealey Plaza with both movie cameras and still cameras taking pictures, and I still think there's a chance there may be something out there that everybody's unaware of that might suddenly turn up. Now, the reason we haven't seen more is that living here at the time and in that area, the newspapers and the radio and the TV stations in the wake of the assassination were just filled with appeals from the federal government for people who were in Dealey Plaza to turn in their films and their photographs, you know, for evidence purposes. And back then, everybody trusted the government. Everybody was very patriotic. And so they came and they turned over all their photographs and the films to the FBI. And now they claim they don't even have any of these. And the only ones we know about are some of the more famous ones, like the Zapruder film and Muchmore film, the Nix film, and a few others. You know, but I think there's a lot more that they had or still have that have never seen the light of the public.
Mr. Mars, that's one thing I love about talking to you, because you have so much information. But I want to inform you that we are joined by two new people. Preston Dennett, the original co-host, a member of the Third Phase Moon team, who I'm sure you know from years back. He's been a MUFON researcher of 26 years, author of 17 books. But before we bring him in real quick, we do have another caller. Area code 760. Welcome to Third Phase Moon Radio.
Jim, I'm a great fan of yours. I think you have a tremendous, perfectly lined up set of information traveling backwards into history. I think you have one of the best explanations and more or less proofs kind of what really has been happening and how it all started. So I'm a great fan, and I wanted to say you have another fan in New York. It was kind of funny. I met him in New York. He was like sort of a con artist, gang member, drug dealer, but he loves you, and like you're part of the reason he actually was more or less reformed. And then he actually escorted me through the city late at night to make sure I wasn't harmed by any of his like ex-friends and gang members and stuff like that.
How cool is that?
I know. And the book dealer of the tables out on the sidewalks, they loved you as well, the particular owner of one of them. So I did actually buy your book that night, and that's how this all happened, which I never got to read, unfortunately, but I will. And hey,
don't loan it to your friends, and often it doesn't come back.
Anyway, Phil, we'll come right back to you. Preston Dennett, I know you had a question, and I know Blake's on a roll with some follow-ups. So go ahead, Preston. We'll come right back to Blake.
Jim, it's great to speak with you.
Howdy.
Yeah, I have a million questions. I'm a huge fan as well of your book.
Because I only got 999 answers.
Well, your books are tremendous. Above Top Secret, Alien Agenda was actually my favorite, and I think it's one of the best fully rounded books about the whole UFO phenomenon. And it's one I recommend to everybody because you can't read that book and come away unconvinced that there's something to this phenomenon.
Thank you.
And like I said, I've got a lot of questions, but I'm really interested in your research into NASA. And one of the chapters of your book, in Alien Agenda, you called NASA means never a straight answer, which always makes me laugh. And I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit about what you've uncovered with the NASA cover-up in UFOs. Yeah,
well, NASA, of course, is a government agency, and as such, and also, excuse me, also a lot of people don't realize that NASA is basically a military operation. In fact, most of those early astronauts were all military officers, so they're all under the Code of Military Justice and under military authority. And so if they're ordered not to say something or to say something, then they simply have to do it, because disobeying orders in the military could mean time in Leavenworth. So, and then there have been the whistleblowers for 8 years out of NASA that says they had, some of them even said they personally had worked on doctoring photographs from the moon, doctoring photographs from space, editing out pictures of UFOs. In fact, there for a while, NASA was sending live feeds back from the space station. And then all of a sudden, like STS-48 and some of the other ones, here's all of these shots of these luminous objects flying all around the Earth and going in and out of the atmosphere, and it started hitting the Internet. And then all of a sudden, NASA stopped sending live feeds back from space. Too many people were seeing too many views of these UFOs and other stuff going on. So, yeah, NASA means never a straight answer. Right now, I'm really fascinated and interested in the whole idea of this 10th extra planet that may be coming into our solar system. The Sumerian tablets call it the 12th planet because they counted the sun and the moon. It used to be in the 80s, there were actually mainstream news stories about a 10th planet, and that was back when they were calling Pluto a planet. Now he's just been relegated to Mickey Mouse's dog, but no, they call it a non-planet.
Go ahead, Blake.
Well, we spoke to the sixth man on the moon, third mission to the moon, right here on third phase of the moon, Edgar Mitchell. And to get seriously about NASA again, we asked Edgar if there was any protocol if he would come across extraterrestrial life in his mission, and he said that there was none whatsoever. Do you think he's telling the truth? If our astronauts are going to extraterrestrial bodies like the moon, that they're not going to be kind of trained if they were to come across an extraterrestrial life on how they would communicate with NASA over the radio waves, etc.?
Well, that's an interesting question, and unfortunately, I'm just a reporter. I even though I was in the military, I wasn't privy to things like that, and also I'm not privy to the internal workings of NASA. I'm kind of like you. I find it hard to believe that these military officers that were the early astronauts were not given some sort of instruction as to what to do if they encountered an alien presence. However, on the other hand, I can also see that the whole position of the government from day one almost has been to deny that anything like that is happening. In fact, you know as well as I do that for so many years the policy was denial and ridicule. You didn't see anything, and if you keep saying you did, you might need psychiatric help. And that certainly has proven very effective in keeping so many people quiet about their UFO experiences. So it is entirely possible that the military did not give any specific instructions like that for the sheer reason that to give instructions like that would be to imply that they had reason to believe that there was such an extraterrestrial presence, and that was something they were loath to do.
Well, with other things that Edgar was saying, he sometimes didn't want to answer the questions, and probably because of the clearance that he does have, and he's still hanging through with his clearance, and we have to respect that. That's right. So, as far as protocol now, do you think the astronauts in a more of a 20th century way of thinking that they're going to be prepared with protocol? I tried to ask NASA, get on the chat lines, get anywhere to ask NASA that direct question. What is the protocol to get the information if they did come across extraterrestrial life and get it to the public? And I've yet to get that answer. And is it efficient?
And you probably won't. Yeah, I'd be real surprised at this late date if the current astronauts are not given something. It would probably be very non-committal and along the lines of the JNAP regulations that were put into effect in the early 50s. You see, early on, the airline pilots, if they had a UFO experience, they would contact their airlines and make a report. Well, these reports were hitting the public. And in the early 50s, they were growing in number. Well, the government stepped in and enacted these regulations that said if you have some unusual, unexplained, anomalous experience, then you contact the government. And they would, that was some of the early programs that they set up. And you call the government and reported to them, thus bypassing the airline administrations, which were leaky and might actually tell people what was going on. And what developed pretty quick was that if you were an airline pilot and you did contact the government and tell them that you had had an experience, then government agents would show up. They'd take you out of work for several days on end, missing that pay, and then they would browbeat you and try to hold you up to ridicule and call you, do everything but call you a liar to your face. And pretty soon the pilots just, got the point, which is don't contact the government, regardless of what you see. And that's how they've kept the lid on that end of it. And I suspect that there's something very similar going on with the current astronauts. Plus, there's the overall thing that they just kind of intuitively know what their superiors want and what they don't want. And I think they realize they don't want reports on UFOs. So either they will come back and not make any report, or they'll come back and make a covert report that'll end up in some classified file somewhere so that the public never sees it.
There have been a lot of NASA astronauts that have actually seen stuff on missions, and some of it was actually recorded on the STS missions, and I just think that's mind-blowing. And also in the 80s, there was an article that appeared in the New York Times that said that the military canceled their military space program. So is it possible that NASA is just a cover-up, civilian cover-up, when the real stuff going on is in the military space program?
Oh, I think that's absolutely the situation. That's exactly what it is. That's how they're able to keep the lid on everything.
With respect to the military and what they're doing, they've already released this photograph of what looks to be a mini space shuttle. They said they stopped the space shuttle program. Well, no, they didn't. They modified it into something that looks pretty much kick ass, and it's a lot better designed than what NASA did, but it has Air Force on it, and when it says Air Force, well, obviously that's one of our military components, and they just released that amazing photo. I wanted to put that out there. Jim, did you get to see that recent imagery?
Well, you know, of course, that the military is always 20 years or more ahead of the public with their technology. And in fact, this is another reason I think that they finally shut down the space program, is because more and more people were becoming to understand that UFOs do not use ramjets, okay? And that these big old rockets that we've seen ever since the 40s, you know, billowing flame and smoke and rising up into the air, that is antique technology. Today it is energy fields and anti-gravity, okay? But that's his top secret stuff, and they don't talk about that. And so, yeah, I think I know what you're talking about on the smaller craft, but the smaller craft, see, these things can actually now, using advanced technology, they can actually go on up into orbit and into the upper atmosphere and then into orbit. And but of course, they don't want to make a big deal about this, because then people start saying, well, how do they do that? And then they'll have to reveal their anti-gravity energy manipulation technology.
I've been asking some of the experts in the ufology world, and basically I want to get this one to you. If somebody had an alien being in their possession, alive or dead, would it be a national security issue? Would that person be safe in this world? Would they be able to get this information out because they had it in their possession?
No. No. In fact, this is one of the great ironies of this whole subject, is that on the one hand, the government has long maintained that there's no such thing, and yet on the other hand, there are federal laws against the possession of any alien artifact or being or anything. Okay, so if you come into the position, if Paul comes and visits you, and you contact the government and say, hey, Paul the alien is here visiting with me, you're in for a world of trouble, because they're going to come down on you like a ton of bricks, and they're going to threaten you with lifelong imprisonment for violating these government laws against possessing an alien artifact. They're going to tell you it's national security. They're going to take Paul away, and you're going to keep your mouth shut. So if you do happen to get friendly with an alien, or you have one in your possession, for God's sakes, don't tell the government.
How do you think you should, as far as getting it out to the public, that's what Third Phase of the Moon is about, getting the information, were you willing to almost go to an
So what would you do? You know, what would you do? Well, you'd probably put him on tape and put it on YouTube, right? And say, look, here's my alien friend. He's a real alien. And then what's going to happen? The government stooges are going to make up some phony videos and throw it right up there saying, yeah, and here's mine. And, oh, by the way, mine's a fake, and that's a fake, too. And then you're going to have other paid informants and dull deadheads who are going to just come and just swamp you with comments saying, well, that's a fake, and I know how you did it. And nobody's going to believe you anyway.
Well, maybe possibly walking down in New York City with the alien and getting a mass sighting of an alien, create a panic, and how are they going to shut that down when you got thousands of people with their phones filming this entity of whatever it is? Maybe that could be the way.
Right, but then they will go and do the same thing, but with a fake alien, and then they'll expose that one as being a fake, and then they'll say yours is a fake, and then it'll be in controversy, and with controversy, nothing gets done, and they'll just go on and on. Now, I'm here to tell you the only way that contact is going to happen, the only way disclosure is going to happen is it's not up to us, it's up to them. When the ETs finally decide it's time, and we're getting close because they have to wait until the vast majority of people are ready and willing to accept the idea that we're not alone in the universe and that there's other folks out there and that they are not necessarily dangerous or hostile to us. And when that day comes, they will allow their craft to be seen over some major city or maybe more than one, and they'll hang there long enough for the news crews to get out and take good video of the whole thing, and then everybody's going to get, well, not everybody, there's still a lot of people who claim the world is actually flat, but most everybody will go, okay, that's it, they're real and they're here. That's going to be the disclosure. People who are waiting around and working real hard, and I know a lot of these people who are trying to get the government to fess up, come clean, and actually do their own disclosure. I think they're in for a disappointment. I don't think that's going to happen.
How long do you think disclosure is going to take place? I mean, you wrote extensively about the Phoenix Lights, and that practically was...
Yeah, that's all part of the conditioning process. See, we are in a conditioning program right now. You go back to the national polls in the 1950s, and you find that almost no one believed that there was any life outside the Earth. Well, today you find that the vast majority, 80-90%, say, yeah, I think there could be life outside the Earth. I either know it or I certainly believe it. Okay, so, that's a total reversal of public viewpoint from the 1950s till today. And so they're still working. That's the conditioning process.
How far away do you think we are? I mean, there's been a really strong movement towards disclosure, especially recently. So you think maybe 5 years, 10 years, or...
I think it might even be sooner than that. I think it depends on the events here on Earth. If everything just keeps muddling along, then it might take another 5 to 10 years, like you're saying. But if things come to a head, if things get very disjointed, very disorganized, and a lot of stuff's happening, they might decide to just step in. It could happen next week, next year.
And what will be the result, you think, of disclosure? How will our lives change?
Well, that's another thing, too. Don't hold your breath, because let me tell you something. If they suddenly, if President Obama came on national TV tomorrow and said, okay, we have reason to believe that we're not alone in the universe and that there's other beings out there and they're very advanced and they come here and visit, but we have no reason to believe that they're hostile, and everybody just remain calm, and who your government's looking into it, I assure you, I don't think a whole lot would change. Your bills would still keep coming.
Mr. Mars, if UFO disclosure was, if it finally came to an end and the technology was there, wouldn't that affect everything? Like you said, things wouldn't change overnight. Our bills would still come.
Yeah. Well, but see, that's now you get into the crux of why that there will be no disclosure, certainly not from us anytime real soon, because if they do, see, the people who run this country, and I'm not talking about the president or the Congress, they don't run the country, they just mouth whatever their rulers tell them to say. I'm talking about the vested moneyed interests that control this country. They don't really care if we know there's aliens out there. What they care about very, very strenuously is that if we know there's aliens out there, then we know for certain that there's alternative technology out there. And why would we keep paying ever-increasing prices for a dwindling supply of petroleum when we know there's free, limitless, non-polluting energy out there, right?
Go ahead, Blake.
Oh, there's interesting, sounds like a UFO's landing in the background.
It does. It does. That's why it sounds like that when I'm on the radio.
Well, the videos we do receive from around the world, I think, are filming these advanced technology, flying, call them what you will, saucers, drones, whatever they are. They're not practical or conventional in any way. And I think with all the cameras around the world filming them, that the truth is getting out in that way, that there is something more advanced than what we're dealing with the common technology, don't you think?
Right, exactly. And we're not just talking about propulsion technology, we're talking about energy as a whole. We're talking about medicine. We're talking about telecommunications, where, all of this would change because all this technology is out there. I'm in touch with people who are working on alternative technology today, and the biggest complaint is that they just hide this stuff,
Mr. Mars, what do you think about that if another country disclosed? I mean, obviously the U.S. government doesn't want to, but what do you think if a rogue country such as Venezuela was the first to say, hey, we're not alone?
They've already done that. France had their Cometa report. Argentina has come out. Mexico, for God's sake, has been hot at the UFOs and aired stuff for years. The mass media here ignores it, and there's nobody thinking in America anymore. They're all just dumbed down, with the fluoride in the water and the drugs and everything else, and all they do is watch TV, and the TV would never talk about this.
Well, I think still there hasn't yet, like a government like ourselves, 1947 crash, aliens in our possession possibly. We're not the only country in the world that has a crash sighting with alien bodies, and there's other governments that have recovered possible aliens. Why don't they?
Right.
They disclose, but they're not disclosing the real deal. I know a lot of these countries have disclosed, but why aren't they coming up with the bodies or the aliens?
Right. Well, see, that's part of the phenomenon. There's a lot of sightings, and I think there's even been crash discs. I've seen some pretty convincing film out of the old Soviet Union that they recovered crashed objects. But you've got to understand that the people that I was talking about, this moneyed, wealthy, vested interest elite that run this country, it's not just this country. They control the international banks, which control many of the other countries. With the fall of communism, the first thing that they had to do was create a central bank. And that was put together by these same international bankers. And so now they exert a tremendous amount of control over what the Russian government does, as they do over Argentina and Mexico and all these other countries. So they get hold of this stuff and they say, okay, you can talk about this, but we're taking this. And that's why it's you don't have any of that to speak of. And then what little slips through, like the little mummified alien or the little piece of metal or whatever, then it's easy enough to just call that a hoax and go on.
Mr. Martin,
question for you.
Yeah, the famous movie They Live, and you refer to them as they. The reference Illuminati's come up. Do they have a name now, these day guys? Can we refer them to?
Well, you can call them, there's got various names. You can call them the Bilderberg Group. You can call them the Illuminati. You can call them the shadow government. It doesn't matter. This is a group of bloodline-related people that track their ancestry all the way back to the Anunnaki. In fact, I think it's quite telling that the Rothschild banking dynasty, the Rothschilds, have publicly stated that they are the descendants of Nimrod, the ancient Sumerian god king. They even named one of their children Nimrod. So, see, they're well aware of all the stuff that we're talking about. You go try to talk to your friends and or relatives and or neighbors and you start trying to talk about some of this stuff, they roll their eyes and act like you're some kind of a nutball. But these folks in control, they know what we're talking about. In fact, after you read my book, Our Occulted History, where I track these people all the way from the Anunnaki to the present time, it begs the question, a very serious question, is, are they even us? All you have to do is look at what's happening in the world today and then look at what's happening in the United States. The United States is still a very rich country. We're rich in resources, okay? And we're rich in a reasonably educated workforce that really wants to work. Why in the world are we in such financial distress like we are right now? $16 trillion in debt, which we can never pay back. Never. Okay? Why is it that way? And again, I submit to you, because these very folks we're talking about, whatever you want to call them, they want it that way.
Yes, I actually heard that without debt, that our U.S. economy would collapse, that they need to keep creating debt. But I wanted to ask you a very important question. What is it that each listener right now on Revolution Radio and all the viewers that will see this on Third Phase of the Moon, what can they do as individuals to help disclosure finally happen?
Okay. Well, number one, turn off the TV and start thinking for yourself. Scout the internet, find out what's going on. You guys are obviously ahead of the curve. Now, for the people listening, what can I do? I hear this all the time. Well, number one, I can't tell you ABCD, do this and this will happen. It's all going to be on an individual basis, based on where you are, what your education is, what your knowledge is, what your social circles are, et cetera, et cetera. So it's all going to have to be up to you as an individual. But here's a few ideas. Write letters to the editor of your local newspaper. Contact the editors of your local TV and radio station and demand that they do what they say they do, which is report the news, and ask them to investigate these things. Hold a book club in your home. Invite your neighbors and your friends in, and get some of the books that you found quite helpful. And let's read this book, and then we'll come back in a couple of weeks and we'll discuss it. Get out, go to meetings, any place where there's a public gathering, raise questions. Don't get argumentative and don't get sanctimonious. Don't get anybody upset. Just raise questions. Well, how about this? How do you explain this? Did you know about this?